Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. We're your hosts, Em and Jay, and today the two of us are talking about the fourth episode of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power. This series has been focusing a lot on comedy, and in this episode we find out that the biggest joke of all is the Horde.
That might sound a bit aggressive, but basically everything that we've been complaining about in the last few episodes happened this episode. Everything about Hordak being ridiculous and not caring about Adora being a deserter and a traitor to the Horde.
And how that was actually a really big problem for the Horde, and it would probably come back to bite them, ends up coming back and biting them in this episode.
The Horde just comes off as completely incompetent, and they are very hard to take seriously as villains and as a threat in general. And I think that that's displayed in this episode. And to be honest, this is one of the biggest problems I have with the show.
Yeah, I think a strong villain and a strong threat is really important for a show like this. This episode begins with Glimmer finishing up a tour of Bright Moon for Adora with Adora's new bedroom.
It seems the people of Bright Moon are still very suspicious of her, which makes sense given her background. And Adora herself is very uncomfortable. She finds her new room to be very overwhelming, although Glimmer doesn't seem to catch on to that, and she laughs it off when Adora brings up some concerns she has.
Adora tries to stay positive, but eventually she decides she can't sleep alone and she tries to go find Glimmer, but runs into the Queen instead.
The Queen explains her history to Adora, talking about her husband, King Micah, who was unfortunately lost in a Horde attack quite some time ago.
She tells Adora that she's letting her stick around because Glimmer believes in her, but she also makes it pretty clear that she'd better not end up causing any trouble. I think the Queen is kind of expressing what a lot of the people of Bright Moon are also feeling. They're probably happy to have She-Ra back, but I don't think they're super sold on Adora. So I actually thought that this scene was pretty good. But this is the only scene in this episode that we can really say we liked.
Unfortunately, the next scene ruins the entire interesting dilemma by having Adora be a total creep.
It turns out she found Glimmer's room and decided to just sleep in her bed without getting permission first. Glimmer has a pretty normal reaction to this and immediately asks Adora what she thinks she's doing. Could you imagine if you just met someone and then you wake up in the morning and they're in your bed?
I think it would have been more interesting if they had Adora sneak into her room and ask Glimmer if she could spend the night there, but Glimmer's half asleep, so she agrees but doesn't actually realize what she's agreeing to.
And then in the morning, they could still have this whole scene, but it would be a lot less creepy. At least then Adora could have said, "You told me I could stay," and then eventually Glimmer could have realized she did. But instead they just had Adora sleeping in her bed without permission, probably for the laughs. It's really uncomfortable. But Adora tells Glimmer that she's never slept alone before, and that she ran into her mother, and her mother probably doesn't like her. Glimmer tells Adora that she's been invited to the weekly rebellion meetings, so that means her mom has to like her.
That doesn't mean anything, honestly. I mean, she's She-Ra. Why wouldn't she be invited to the rebellion meetings?
Glimmer takes Adora to the meeting room, and we find out that the rebellion is actually really small. It's basically the Queen, Glimmer, Bo, and then these two other characters, Natasha and Spinnerella. Despite the fact that they're the only two people that bother to show up on a weekly basis, Bo and the others don't seem to care at all. Bo tells Adora that no one knows what they do. You know, Bo, all you have to do is talk to them. It's really weird because it makes it seem like the Horde isn't such a desperate situation. The rebellion has basically been 3 people for some time because apparently they had a really big defeat and all the other princesses quit. So it's been the Queen, Bo, Glimmer, and I guess the royal court. That's not even including the time that Glimmer and Bo were kids. So you have 2 princesses who show up every week and people don't care enough about them to even talk to them or ask them what their abilities are and how they could all work off of each other and help each other. The meeting begins and the Queen tells everyone that Princess Perfuma sent a distress call because her kingdom is under attack by the Horde. Adora suggests that she, Glimmer, and Bo go send aid, and she can go as She-Ra, and the queen agrees. It does seem weird that this whole season is about recruiting princesses for the rebellion, but the two princesses that they do have in the rebellion, who aren't Glimmer, are just on the sidelines.
Yeah, they really don't get any development at all. I don't understand why they were even introduced in this episode. They don't do anything in this episode. They don't do anything basically all season.
They sit there and smile. They don't even speak in this episode.
Yeah, and then they show up in the last episode and do something, but that's it. So what's the point of them being here now?
They reach the kingdom, and Glimmer is surprised to see that the plants are dying because her mother didn't tell them about that, but Bo suggests that maybe the queen doesn't even know. Adora reveals that she's transformed into She-Ra, and she's planning on being She-Ra for the entire trip. Adora says that she's happy to be She-Ra the whole time because people like She-Ra more than Adora, which probably is true because Adora was a Horde soldier, and She-Ra's the legendary warrior princess. But Princess Perfuma makes her first appearance, and she's very happy to see She-Ra because it turns out that the Horde is killing the land, and they expect She-Ra to heal it because the stories say that She-Ra has healing powers. The thing is, Adora doesn't know how to do that. She hasn't really had any training with her She-Ra powers, so she pulls Bo and Glimmer aside to try to figure something out because all these people are counting on her. After messing around with the sword for a while, the same way that Adora does, she ends up activating the magical transformation, which is the same one that was used on Horsey earlier to turn him into Swiftwind. But she ends up hitting a random lizard, and the lizard looks about the same, but it has a horn and wings now.
This bothered me because I feel like the lizard should have turned into a dragon instead of having unicorn aspects to it. When it comes to Swiftwind, he is a horse, and the next fantastical aspect of a horse would be a unicorn, or in this case, an alicorn. So when it comes to a lizard, wouldn't it make more sense for it to turn into a dragon? I mean, the dragon can still have horns and wings, but still, a dragon. Does that mean this lizard can talk now too?
Because the lizard just runs off, and we never see it again.
I'm assuming it's still out there, and I expect it to join the show eventually. I'm serious. It better join the show.
The thing is, this was probably just a one-off joke.
Well, Swiftwind stays Swiftwind. He doesn't turn back into the horse. I refuse to call it Horsey. So, based on that logic, this lizard, this unizard, if you will, should still be out there.
I mean, they probably forgot that they even wrote this joke at all.
It should have been a dragon. I'm upset that it wasn't a dragon.
She-Ra goes back to the people and tries to heal their land, but it doesn't work, and she ends up changing back to Adora. Everyone's surprised by this, and also really upset because they were expecting the She-Ra from the Legends and not some girl. Princess Perfuma was just expecting that She-Ra would come in and magically save them and then everything would be okay.
Yeah, solve all their problems for them. I'm kind of surprised that this kingdom has even been able to stand for as long as it has, considering the fact that this world is supposed to be at constant war. And Perfuma says that her powers aren't good for fighting, which is pretty surprising considering the fact that she has plant powers, and I don't understand why she wouldn't see the value that would have on the battlefield.
She says that she and her people just want to live peacefully in their ancestral home,
which is completely understandable, but they still have to take precautions to make sure that nothing happens to their home. For the most part, Perfuma seems to be completely ignoring the problems that they're facing.
Even if She-Ra was able to heal their land, it wouldn't get rid of the Horde, and I don't think the Horde would give up. They would keep coming back. And the thing is, She-Ra can't be there all the time. She really needs to step up and take responsibility for her own kingdom.
Because she's the one who's in charge, so she's the one that has to be responsible and can't just pass it off onto somebody else. For example, there's this huge ominous billow of smoke coming from not far from their home, and she chooses to completely ignore it, even though it's clearly an issue. And they don't seem to be taking any kind of precautions to protect themselves.
They think that now She-Ra's there, that everything's just gonna be okay.
She even tells She-Ra not to bother with this smoke cloud
and just focus on healing the land.
But healing the land isn't going to get rid of the problem, and Perfuma was just very frustrating to me.
Adora apologizes to the people and she says that she's not gonna give up, but they all have and they just leave. Adora comes up with a plan because she knows the Horde and she figures out that they're probably using some machine to poison the land, so she she, Glimmer, and Bow can sneak in to where the Horde is and attack the machines and try to save the land that way.
This is an issue that we were talking about in the previous episode with
The Horde just not being concerned with the fact that there's a traitor, except for Shadow Weaver.
And she's totally dismissed by their leader, Hordak, which is so ridiculous. And honestly, one of the things that's ruining the show for me. How could Hordak not understand how serious of a situation this is? He needs to care. Like, here we have a former
Force captain
who is now infiltrating your base, which is something that is completely understandable and should be expected, really.
She knows all of their tactics, she knows what they're capable of, she knows the kinds of machines that they're using, and she knows how to stop them. And now she's using that knowledge against them. And this is just something that he never thinks about. This defeat is kind of on him.
It is on him, and it's really disappointing. Because Hordak just doesn't seem like a threat at all.
All he really does is sit in his chair and act really menacing, and he speaks in a deep, menacing voice. But the actions he takes and the actions he doesn't take speak way louder than words. So Adora, Glimmer, and Bow managed to get their hands on some
Horde soldier outfits in order to infiltrate the Horde.
We're gonna pause on the recap for a minute to talk about another issue that's come up with the inconsistent animation. During the lead up to this show's premiere, there was a lot of talk about diversity and how this show was really taking steps towards diversity. And one of those ways was having characters have different body types. In the original, there wasn't a lot of return on investment when it came to animation in the 80s. So because of that, a lot of cartoons relied on toy sales to make money
in order to continue their projects.
So one thing that Mattel did to try to cut back on costs was they made the decision to use the same toy molds for all of the characters. So basically there was a female toy mold and a male toy mold. And because of that, all the characters ended up having the same body types, with a few exceptions like Madame Razz. But because of this, there wasn't a whole lot of diversity when it came to body types. For the Netflix version, it doesn't seem like they're really focusing on toys anyway. They've only got the 2 toys.
But in the meantime, they said they were focusing a lot on Glimmer as this body positive character. However, in this episode, as soon as Glimmer puts on the Horde uniform, her body type completely changes to be much slimmer and closer to Adora's body type.
There are some shots where her legs look a bit thicker, but nowhere near what she looks like when she's wearing her normal outfit. And I don't understand how this ended up happening. They said so many times that diversity was something that was really important to them, but then one of their body positive characters ends up getting this treatment. This was one of the things that they used in the promotional material to say that this series was better than the original.
Yet they didn't bother to put the care into the show the way that they promised they would. It just comes off as like they wanted the recognition, but were too careless to deliver.
The inconsistent art is not only this one scene with Glimmer, it's all throughout the show. For example, She-Ra is meant to be 8 feet tall. There are times when She-Ra does look like she's towering over everybody, but then there are other times where she basically looks the same height and everybody else. Or she looks like maybe a little bit taller, but not any kind of surprising height difference.
There's a problem with her sword where
in one shot she has the sword, in another shot it's gone.
I mean, if there was a sheath or something for it, I think that would make more sense. But half the time she'll just pull it out of nowhere. Like it'll be on her back all of a sudden when it wasn't there before.
And we know that mistakes happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's always gonna be animation errors, but I'm surprised they didn't put more care into that.
Since Adora has the advantage of knowing the Horde, she knows when their shifts change and when's the right time to try to infiltrate.
They get to the machine that is poisoning Perfuma's kingdom, but are caught by a guard. Adora tries to play it off by giving them a password, only for the password to be outdated. The guard says that it's months old, so this leads to them having to fight their way out.
Why does Adora know a password that's months old? Wasn't she just promoted to Force Captain?
Yeah, it'd be strange that she wouldn't know what's going on in the Horde, considering the fact that she did hold such a high place in it, and such a high regard with Shadow Weaver.
Has it been months since she left the Horde? Because we were kind of under the impression imagine that it's maybe been a few days to a week, maybe a little more.
At the most.
I guess it depends on how long it took to travel.
You know, she leaves the Horde and then she goes to Brightmoon and spends her first night there.
And then the next day they go to the meeting and then they go straight to Plumeria. So unless it took months to get there, why is this password outdated? But back in Plumeria, Adora leaves a note saying that they're going to try to stop the Horde, and if they don't make it, she's sorry that she couldn't be the hero they wanted her to be. And this is enough to get Perfuma to rethink helping them. So the people of Plumeria go to help Adora, and to be honest, they're not great backup.
On the one hand, you have Perfuma, who's using her plant powers in an active way, but she's also followed by a few villagers, and these people have no formal training, no armor, and clearly no idea what they're doing, and yet somehow they win. Also, there's a child in the group with a wind chime.
They're armed with wind chimes and leaves.
Yeah, a couple of the villagers are beating a Horde soldier with leaves. This is just embarrassing for the Horde.
How are the Horde any kind of threat? I mean, aside from their technology.
They were bested by the citizens of Plumeria, and they're just hippies. Actually, they sound like surfers for some reason, but they're supposed to be hippies.
We do get to see Adora using some combat skills, which I liked seeing, and I wish she would do more of.
But she almost immediately turns into She-Ra when Perfuma finally shows up.
She-Ra attacks the machine that's poisoning the land, and it works, and the damage is undone.
Perfuma also gets the full power of her abilities back, and she uses it to overwhelm the Horde camp. And the Horde immediately flees. They don't even try. Honestly, this did not look good for the Horde at all.
How can we take the Horde seriously as a threat? I mean, it's one thing to have civilians helping out in whatever way they can, but a direct assault...
It was also pretty short, all things considered. That was a very quick fight.
True. The Horde didn't put up any kind of fight.
I mean, apparently they have terrible communication skills since they changed the password without telling the head of command, and now they're bested by a handful of villagers, including a child with a wind chime, and people with leaf fans.
But Glimmer asks Perfuma if she would join the rebellion, and Perfuma questions if that's a good idea because it went really bad last time. Glimmer says that it'll work out this time because it was their parents that failed, and somehow they're better than their parents. I don't know why.
She could have just said, well, this time we have She-Ra.
That's an advantage that their parents didn't have. Also, Glimmer, your dad was killed by the Horde. How can you be so dismissive of your own parents?
Yeah, that came off as pretty insensitive.
But this persuades Perfuma and she decides to join the rebellion, and all the villagers agree. Back with the Horde, Catra informs the rest of her squad that she's been promoted to Force Captain before being interrupted by Shadow Weaver. Shadow Weaver demands to know more about Adora and why she's not around. And Catra keeps bringing up good points with Shadow Weaver. She says that if Adora wanted to be there, she would be. And she tells Shadow Weaver that she abandoned them and betrayed them. But she also makes it really personal and says that Adora betrayed her. But that's really not what happened. We saw what happened. Adora asked her to come with and she's the one who rejected.
So technically, this is on Catra. Despite all this, Shadow Weaver is completely set on getting Adora back to the point where that's really her only goal in the show.
It's the only thing she's thinking about. Catra does try to protect Adora by not telling Shadow Weaver about She-Ra, but then Shadow Weaver tries to use her powers on Catra, but it doesn't work and she runs off. Catra actually did try to reach out to Shadow Weaver, which I was really surprised by, even though ultimately it's not worth it. Shadow Weaver isn't worth it.
Yeah, I mean, this Shadow Weaver is pretty much a lost cause.
Shadow Weaver goes to the crystal and she tells it that it will not reject her, but Hordak confronts her and once again tells her to stop looking for Adora and that their mission is to destroy the Whispering Woods so they can attack Brightmoon. And he says that she's just distracted by this one missing soldier.
I still don't understand why they chose to take this route with Hordak. It's really inappropriate for his position to be so flippant and dismissive of a traitor like that.
I mean, they can focus on both things. He tells Shadow Weaver that she'd better listen or else he'll take her powers away, and then leaves. He doesn't even talk to her directly. He just talks to her through a screen. All he ever really does is sit in his chair there and yell at Shadow Weaver, and sometimes praise Catra. We really don't know his motivations. Why is he so antagonistic to Shadow Weaver, who's his second in command, but he's really nice with Catra? Shadow Weaver calls Catra and tells her that she knows that Adora is She-Ra, and she gets angry at Catra for hiding this from her. And Catra tells Shadow Weaver that Adora is just going through a phase. This is what happens when you try to combine teen tropes with war. She tells Catra that they're not going to rest until they get Adora back, and that her mission is to bring Adora back. The thing is, Hordak is above Shadow Weaver, and Shadow Weaver is above Catra. Catra should probably just go to Hordak and say, listen, Shadow Weaver isn't listening to you, and she's making me waste our time going to get Adora when we should be focusing on destroying the Whispering Woods so we can get to Bright Moon like you want us to do. And then this whole problem would probably be solved.
Yeah, and Catra could have her revenge earlier.
Really, the Horde's just a mess.
It's really disappointing.
The thing is, Hordak knows that Shadow Weaver isn't giving up on Adora. He should just get rid of her now.
Yeah, I mean, if he really thinks that it's so much of a problem and an inconvenience for them to go after Adora, then why not just get rid of Shadow Weaver and replace her with someone more competent in his eyes?
Just replace her with Catra. Catra's totally willing to get a promotion.
That's basically what happened in the end anyway.
That's what he did when Adora went missing. He just replaced her with Catra. So if you like Catra, just replace Shadow Weaver. You clearly don't like her. She's not listening to your orders. She's wasting your time as far as you're concerned. Hordak just is not working as a leader. And he's not working as a main villain. I mean, he really isn't the main villain. Catra's the main villain. But he's supposed to be the big bad. But he's not leading efficiently. He has his goals, and he's keeping Shadow Weaver around even though she's actively working against him when he says, don't go after Adora, and she keeps doing that. It makes it look like, why should we take Hordak seriously? Shadow Weaver cares more about going after Adora than losing her powers, because Hordak's threatening to take them away. So Hordak must not be that big a deal.
In the end, I'm really disappointed because we've had so many amazing villains in kids shows, and the Horde could have easily been one of them. But this Horde is just so pathetic and embarrassing.
They don't work as villains.
Right. And ultimately, when it comes to this kind of conflict, you really need a strong villain, and we just don't get that in this show.
But that was just our thoughts on this episode. What did you guys think?
Thanks for watching. We really appreciate it. Leave a like and a comment to let us know what your thoughts, and if you want to see more of our content, including recapping the rest of Season 1 of She-Ra and the Princesses of Power, then subscribe to our channel, and we'll see you in the next video. Bye!
Bye!